She gave him everything, her love, her trust, her loyalty, but he moved every penny she owned straight into his mistress's hands and thought she'd crawl back broken. But what he never saw coming was the woman she'd become after the betrayal. Now he's on his knees, stripped of everything, while she stands on top of the world with one final move that will seal his fate forever. You won't believe how this story ends. Hey, my friends, my family, I hope you're all doing well today. You know, I've noticed most of you are silent listeners, and honestly, I want to hear your voices too. Are you truly satisfied with my stories or not? I really want to know your thoughts, because your support means everything to me. So don't just listen, talk to me in the comments. Let's grow this family together. And if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, because trust me, this story is going to leave you speechless. Now, let's dive right into it. The night was supposed to be ordinary, soft and quiet, the kind of night when the wind hummed through the city like a lullaby. But for Raina, the air had grown unbearably heavy, like the entire universe was holding its breath, waiting for something to shatter. The dim yellow light of the lamp cast long shadows across her bedroom wall as she sat on the edge of their neatly made bed, her hands cold, her heart pounding too loudly against her ribs. Her phone vibrated softly against the wooden table. One glance at the screen, at the small notification bar, was enough to tear through her soul like a blade of ice. Her breath hitched. Her body froze. Her pupils dilated as if she were staring into the face of something monstrous. It wasn't a message from Ethan. It wasn't a call. It was a bank notification, one that would change everything. Her thumb trembled as she tapped it open. A single sentence glared back at her like a cruel joke. $480,000 transferred successfully. Her entire life's savings gone. Every penny she had bled for, saved for, sacrificed sleep for, vanished with one swipe. Her lungs tightened, and her ears rang as if the world had narrowed to that one glowing screen. She blinked once, twice, hoping it was a mistake, a glitch, a nightmare she would wake up from. But the numbers didn't change. The name on the transaction stood there, sharp and undeniable, Celine Marquez. Her hands began to shake uncontrollably, not because of the money, though that alone was devastating, but because of the name. She knew that name. She'd seen it in whispers before, a faint perfume on Ethan's shirt, a lipstick shade that wasn't hers on the rim of his whiskey glass, a late-night text she once caught but chose to believe was nothing. She had buried that suspicion, smothered it with trust, because love had always made her hope instead of doubt. But tonight, hope collapsed. Tonight, reality had teeth. Her fingers, cold and unsteady, pressed against the call icon beside Ethan's name. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then silence. The call went to voicemail. She called again and again. Each unanswered ring felt like a cruel countdown, dragging her deeper into a darkness she hadn't prepared for. She whispered to herself, "Pick up, just pick up," as if her voice could reach him through the distance. As if love could still bridge the widening gap between them, but it couldn't. He didn't pick up. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window pane. Inside, Raina's breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. A part of her wanted to throw the phone across the room, to scream until her throat tore, but she couldn't move. Her body sat rigid, frozen between fury and disbelief. Her heart pounded like a war drum, loud and merciless. This wasn't just a betrayal of love, it was a betrayal of years, a betrayal of every sleepless night she spent supporting him when he was building his business, a betrayal of the woman who trusted too easily. Her gaze drifted to the mirror across the room. The woman staring back at her wasn't the soft, smiling Raina who used to believe Ethan would protect her from the world. No, this reflection had steel in her eyes, storm clouds gathering in their depths. She was shaking, yes, but beneath the trembling was something far more dangerous. Resolve. The sound of the door unlocking sliced through the silence like a knife. The clock read 2:13 a.m. Her pulse spiked. The scent of expensive cologne hit her first, followed by the soft click of leather shoes against the marble floor. Ethan entered casually, like a man who had nothing to hide. He loosened his tie, rolled his sleeves, and yawned dramatically. There wasn't a trace of guilt in his step. If anything, there was arrogance, the kind that came from being too sure the other person would never fight back. "Ethan," she said softly. Too softly. So softly it made him pause for a heartbeat before smirking. He tossed his jacket onto the couch and poured himself a drink like he always did after late nights. "You're still awake?" he asked, his tone careless. She stood slowly, every movement deliberate, controlled. Her phone was still clutched in her hand, the glowing bank notification lighting up her knuckles. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice calm, almost too calm. The calm before a storm. Ethan didn't even look up. "Work," he said lazily. "Meetings. You know how it is." She stepped closer, and the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume clung to him like evidence he hadn't even tried to erase. It wasn't hers. She knew the way his cologne mixed with her perfume after years of marriage. This was different. This was someone else. "Really?" she whispered, holding the phone up. "Because according to this—" Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The glow of the screen filled the space between them like a spotlight on his betrayal. Ethan froze for half a second, barely perceptible, but she caught it. Then, just as quickly, he laughed. Actually laughed. "It's just money, Raina," he said, as if her entire world hadn't just been stripped from her. "Why are you making it sound so dramatic?" Her chest burned. "Money that was mine, money I saved, money I trusted you with." Ethan sipped his drink, leaning back like a man too confident in his power. "You're my wife. What's yours is mine, right? Besides—" His lips curved into a smirk. "I'll handle everything. You don't have to worry about things like this." She stared at him, and for the first time saw not her husband but a stranger. Raina's nails dug into her palm. His arrogance didn't just hurt, it scorched. This wasn't the Ethan she'd fallen in love with. This was a man drunk on power and the thrill of his own cruelty. She walked closer until she could see the reflection of her phone screen in his eyes. "Who is Celine?" she asked. His glass froze midway to his lips, just for a breath, but she saw it. The flicker. The tiny crack in his mask. Then he shrugged. "Don't go looking into things you don't understand, Raina." The way he said it wasn't defensive. It was threatening. Her throat felt tight, but her voice was steady. "You stole everything from me." Ethan leaned in, lowering his voice like a serpent whispering poison. "Everything from you. Raina, let's not pretend you built any of this. I made this life. I earned this. You just tagged along." That broke something inside her. Not the kind of break that shatters and weakens, the kind that sharpens, that forges steel out of pain. She straightened her back, meeting his gaze dead on. "No, Ethan. I built everything with you, and you just made the biggest mistake of your life." He laughed again, shaking his head. "You're not going to do anything. You've never done anything. You don't even know how." But if he had been paying attention, he would have noticed something dangerous flicker behind her eyes. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. The clock ticked on the wall, but in Raina's mind, time slowed. Every memory, every smile, every lie, every quiet night when she believed they were building a future together, played like a cruel movie she didn't consent to. But this wasn't the end of her story. Something inside her shifted. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply walked past him, to the window where the city lights burned like distant stars. She whispered, not to him, but to herself, "You'll regret this, Ethan." Her voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made him finally turn to look at her. For the first time that night, a flicker of unease crossed his face. "Are you threatening me?" he asked. She looked back at him, her eyes reflecting the city lights like fire. "No," she said, "I'm promising you." He didn't know it yet, but the woman standing before him wasn't the same woman who once waited for him to love her. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head like she'd just told a joke. He grabbed his drink, took a sip, and walked toward the bedroom. "Go to sleep, Raina. You're being dramatic. Tomorrow you'll calm down, like always." But tomorrow wouldn't be like always. Tomorrow would be different. Because tonight, something had awoken in her. The door clicked shut behind him, and she stood alone in the living room, bathed in the glow of the city. The fear was still there, coiled like a snake in her chest, but beneath it, something stronger burned. A storm. A plan she didn't even have words for yet. She looked at the transaction message one last time. Celine, his mistress. The woman who thought she could steal what Raina had built. Ethan thought Raina was weak. But weakness was a mask she'd worn out of love, out of trust. And now, that mask had cracked. And Ethan had no idea the woman he mocked was about to become the woman who would burn his entire empire to ash. Her fingers slowly curled around the phone as she whispered into the night, "You just declared war, Ethan, and I don't lose." But that night, Ethan had no idea Raina had just started a war that would burn everything he built. 2. The night still hummed with the city's restless heartbeat, the glow of the skyline casting long silver streaks across the living room floor where Raina stood, motionless, like a shadow carved out of fury and quiet brilliance. The echoes of Ethan's laughter still clung to the walls, arrogant and careless, but now they no longer hurt. They fueled her. She didn't need to scream to shake the ground beneath his feet. She only needed to move in silence, the way storms often did before they tore everything apart. She walked to the window and pressed her fingertips lightly against the cold glass, watching the city breathe beneath her. He thought she'd break. He thought she'd collapse the way she always did, but this time was different. She wasn't just a wounded wife. She was a woman reborn in the flames of betrayal. The silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was her armor. And beneath that calm surface, something dangerous was beginning to awaken. Hours bled into one another like ink on paper as she sat in the dim light, her phone still showing the name, Celine Marquez, on the screen. But instead of trembling, her mind sharpened like a blade. Memories flooded in, but they no longer burned. They became fuel. She remembered the night Ethan came to her with nothing but a dream, the night she believed in him enough to pour every cent of her savings into building their empire. She remembered signing the company documents together, her name on every legal page, her signature woven into its foundation like steel. And she remembered every late night she spent doing the unseen work while he got the glory. He thought she was just the quiet woman behind his throne. But in reality, she was the throne, and thrones don't beg, they reclaim. And Ethan had no idea she was still holding the one card that could turn his kingdom into dust. She rose from the couch with a stillness that felt terrifying even to herself. Her feet moved with purpose toward the drawer beneath the study table, the one Ethan never bothered to open. Her fingers slid inside and pulled out a black folder, thick with papers, contracts, original deeds, and ownership certificates. Legal proof, ironclad. She had never planned to use it. Back then, it had only been a safety net, a quiet assurance for a future she thought they'd build together. But tonight, that net was about to become a blade. She placed the folder on the table, flipped it open, and stared at her own signature beneath the company's name. A slow, dangerous smile curved her lips. He stole her money, but she owned everything he'd built with it. The world outside was asleep, but she wasn't. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found his name. Lucas Bennett. Childhood friend, brilliant lawyer. The boy who once stood under the rain with her when no one else did. She hesitated for a second. Not because she doubted him, but because this call meant she was stepping into a war she could never turn back from. Then she pressed dial. The phone rang once, twice. Then a warm, deep voice answered, "Raina." For a heartbeat, her throat tightened. She had spent so long being silent that speaking now felt like breathing fire. "Lucas," she said, her voice low but steady. "I need your help." Within an hour, the quiet apartment filled with the soft scent of fresh rain from Lucas's coat as he stepped in, concern shadowing his dark eyes. He had always known Ethan wasn't the man he pretended to be, but he respected Raina's choice. Tonight, there was no respect left for Ethan, only fury buried beneath a lawyer's calm. Lucas's gaze fell on the folder spread across the table, then lifted to meet her eyes. "This is it, isn't it?" he asked softly. She nodded once, her fingers brushing over the bold company name like a queen tracing the edges of her crown. "He stole everything," she said, "and now I'm taking it back." The way Lucas's jaw tightened told her he wasn't just her lawyer tonight. He was her ally in war. They sat together under the faint hum of the lamp, flipping through each document like generals examining their battlefield. Every contract bore Ethan's overconfidence. Trusting she'd never betray him, he had left her in control of more than he ever realized. Her shares, her voting power, her rights to approve major transactions, all of it still hers. Lucas leaned back, a small smirk pulling at his lips. "He built his empire on your foundation, Raina," he said. "He just forgot who the foundation belongs to." Her pulse steadied, the panic that had once threatened to crush her, now replaced by a strange, burning calm. She whispered, "He thought he could humiliate me and walk away untouched. But he's about to learn that I'm not his shadow. I'm his storm." Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then harder, as if the sky itself was echoing her fury. Lucas slid a legal document across the table, a power of action notice that would freeze Ethan's access to company funds the moment she signed it. One signature, and his empire would begin to tremble. She picked up the pen slowly, her fingers steady, her heart eerily calm. But just as the pen's tip touched the paper, a flicker of doubt tried to claw its way in. This wasn't just revenge, it was war. A war that could destroy everything she had once loved. But then she remembered the way Ethan had looked at her tonight, not like a wife, not like a partner, but like a burden. And that was all the strength she needed. Once she signed this paper, there would be no turning back. Lucas's voice broke through her storm of thoughts. "Are you sure?" She met his eyes, and for the first time there was no fear in hers. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." He watched her for a long moment, then nodded, the flicker of something deeper, something unspoken, shining behind his gaze. Lucas had loved her for years. He had watched her fall for a man who never deserved her. And now, he would stand beside her as she took back what was hers. She pressed the pen down and signed. Ink bled across paper, like a declaration of war. And in that moment, the quiet woman Ethan mocked transformed into a queen, reclaiming her throne. Lucas exhaled softly, a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "That's my girl," he murmured under his breath, not as a claim, but as a warrior's salute. She closed the folder, locking the weight of her decision inside it. The rain outside grew louder, echoing against the glass like the march of something inevitable. Ethan was out there somewhere, probably in some luxury hotel suite, wrapped in silk sheets with Celine, laughing, drinking, celebrating his illusion of control. He thought she was home, crying into a pillow, but instead, she had just pulled the rug out from beneath his feet. She could already picture the look on his face when he realized who held the real power. She turned to Lucas. "Freeze the accounts. Notify the board. I want every door he built with my money closed." Lucas nodded without hesitation. "Consider it done." He reached for his laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard like a soldier loading a weapon. She watched him work, the clicking of keys mingling with the storm outside. For the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel powerless. She felt like herself again, the woman she had buried beneath Ethan's shadow, the woman who had built everything. But what neither of them knew was that Ethan wasn't as oblivious as they thought. Miles away, in a luxury hotel suite, Ethan's phone buzzed on the nightstand beside a half-empty glass of champagne. He was sprawled across the bed, Celine curled against him, a smirk on his lips, as he reveled in his own arrogance. But when he picked up the phone and glanced at the alert blinking on the screen, his grin faltered, his brows furrowed. A flicker of irritation, then unease, passed over his face. Something wasn't right. He sat up slowly, the weight of an unfamiliar threat creeping beneath his skin. "What's wrong?" Selina murmured sleepily. Ethan didn't answer. He just stared at the notification like it was a warning he couldn't yet read. He thought Raina would stay broken. He never imagined she'd strike first. And as Raina's signature dried on the paper, Ethan's smile began to die. Back in the apartment, she stood up and walked to the mirror, the same one she had stared into the night before when pain ruled her reflection. But this time, her eyes were different. No more trembling, no more fear, just a quiet, dangerous fire. She ran a hand through her hair and whispered, "You wanted war, Ethan. You've got it." Lucas closed his laptop and stood beside her, his presence solid and steady. For a moment, the storm outside roared so loudly it felt like the whole city was holding its breath again. And in that silence, the first chess piece had just been moved. She turned away from the mirror and picked up the folder, tucking it beneath her arm like a sword she was ready to wield. Her heels clicked against the wooden floor as she walked toward the door, every step echoing the birth of the queen Ethan never saw coming. "This isn't just about revenge," she said quietly. "This is about taking back everything he thought he owned, including me." And as she signed the first legal document, she had no idea. Ethan was already making another deadly move behind her back. 3. The city's morning light spilled through the skyscrapers, slicing through the heavy clouds like a blade, but inside the glass fortress of Ethan's company, the air carried a chill far colder than winter. The echo of heels striking polished marble broke the silence like a war drum, announcing the arrival of someone who no longer belonged to the shadows. Raina sat in his chair, the chair he used to lean back in, commanding the world like it was his kingdom. But now the king's throne belonged to someone else. Her posture was regal, unshaken, her back straight, her gaze fixed on the panoramic view behind his desk as if the empire outside already answered to her. The gold morning light brushed across her face, making her look almost untouchable. This wasn't the soft woman who once cried behind closed doors. This was a queen ready to begin the game, and Ethan had no idea the rules had changed overnight. The elevator dinged softly, and Ethan strode out with his usual swagger, his suit crisp, his expensive watch gleaming, and that infuriating smirk plastered across his face. He had spent the night in silk sheets, surrounded by luxury, thinking he had won. But the moment he pushed the glass doors open, the world he thought was unshakable tilted beneath his feet. His confident steps faltered as his eyes locked on the sight before him. Raina, in his chair, her legs crossed, the ownership folder resting elegantly on the desk like a loaded gun. His smirk froze, cracked, and slipped away. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the room like broken glass. But Raina didn't flinch. She turned her head slowly, meeting his glare, with a calm that burned deeper than rage. "This isn't your chair anymore," she said softly, almost sweetly, but her voice carried the weight of power. "This isn't even your company anymore." For the first time in years, Ethan felt a flicker of something he wasn't used to: fear. He barked out a short laugh, sharp and hollow, trying to reclaim the upper hand. "Raina, stop playing games. This is my company, my empire. You don't belong here anymore." She rose slowly from the chair, the black silk of her outfit flowing like water, and leaned forward, placing her hands lightly on the desk. "Your company?" she repeated, her voice a whisper wrapped in steel. She slid the folder toward him with 2 fingers. "Read, Ethan." He stared down at the familiar logo on the document, but as he flipped the pages, his smirk bled away entirely. Line after line of legal text carved the truth into his chest like a blade. Her name, her signature, her shares. Controlling shares, not minority, not equal. Controlling. The foundation of the empire had always belonged to her. His hands tightened on the papers until his knuckles turned white. "This can't be real," he whispered, more to himself than to her. But it was real. And it was the beginning of his fall. "It's real," Raina said softly, walking around the desk like a predator circling its prey. "Every deal you signed, every contract you filed, every board decision. You needed my signature. You forgot who put the first stone in this empire, Ethan. You built everything on my foundation. And now..." She paused, letting the silence press against him like a weight. "I'm taking it back." He slammed the folder shut and threw it on the table, stepping toward her with that old arrogance, the one that once used to scare her into silence. But this time, she didn't move back. She stood there, unshaken, her chin slightly lifted. "You wouldn't dare," he hissed, his voice low. She smiled then, a slow, dangerous smile that made his chest tighten. "I already did." For the first time, he wasn't the hunter. He was the hunted. Outside the office glass, employees moved nervously, feeling the tension radiate like a storm waiting to break. Lucas stood at the far end of the corridor, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching everything unfold. He wasn't just her lawyer now, he was her shield, her silent ally. And he knew this was only the opening move in a war that would leave one of them on the ground. Ethan's hands curled into fists, his jaw clenching as he tried to snatch the documents off the table. But Raina leaned forward, placing her manicured hand on the folder before he could touch it. "Careful," she said softly. "These papers have more power than your temper ever did. You can't scream your way out of this one." His eyes flashed with anger. "You think you can humiliate me like this?" She tilted her head, her earrings catching the light like small sparks. "No, Ethan." "I don't think. I know." And for a heartbeat, the empire he ruled began to crack at its very core. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the calm fire burning in her eyes. "You took what was mine. You stole my money. You gambled with my trust. You laughed while I cried. And now..." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper sharp enough to cut skin. "I'll take everything you think is yours." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Because deep down, beneath the layers of arrogance, he understood she wasn't bluffing. His phone buzzed once on the table, but he ignored it, too consumed by the woman standing in front of him like an executioner wearing a queen's crown. "You're bluffing," he finally spat out. "You won't survive in this world without me. You don't have the stomach for power." She gave a small, amused laugh that echoed against the glass walls like a warning bell. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, "you still don't understand. I built this world with my bare hands. I don't need you. You needed me." And with every word she spoke, Ethan felt the ground beneath his empire crumble. The sound of her heels against the floor echoed as she circled him slowly, like a queen inspecting the man she was about to dethrone. Employees outside began to glance toward the office, sensing something monumental was happening. Even the board members waiting in their meeting room shifted uneasily, knowing Raina's presence wasn't a coincidence. It was a declaration. He tried to grab her arm as she passed him, a desperate move to remind her of the control he once had. But she turned her head sharply, her eyes like knives, and whispered, "Don't touch me again." His hand froze in midair. For the first time, he saw it. She wasn't his anymore, not the woman who once looked at him with love, not the woman who forgave his cruelty. She was gone, and in her place stood someone untouchable. Ethan wasn't fighting a wounded wife anymore. He was fighting a queen. "Let's make this easy," she said finally, returning to the chair and sitting down with the same calm authority that had shaken him the moment he walked in. "Step down from your position. Quietly, gracefully. Keep your name on the door if that makes your ego feel better. But the power—" She tapped the folder with one red-tipped nail. "Belongs to me now." His chest heaved with fury. "I will destroy you," he hissed. She tilted her head and smiled with quiet cruelty. "Then you better move fast, Ethan. Because the game has already started." The buzzing of his phone grew louder against the desk, the vibration relentless, as if the world outside their battle demanded his attention. He grabbed it finally, irritation etched into his features, but the moment he saw the name flashing across the screen, his breath caught. Celine. He swiped it open, expecting some playful message to boost his ego. But instead, what he saw made his skin go cold, because in this game, even his mistress wasn't loyal. Raina watched the color drain from his face, her fingers steepled under her chin like a woman watching a chess piece being cornered. His eyes flicked across the message again and again, disbelief tightening every muscle in his jaw. Whatever Celine had sent, it wasn't sweet words or soft affection. It was a threat, a shift, a betrayal, the kind he never saw coming. She rose slowly, adjusting her blazer like a queen adjusting her crown. "You should probably answer that," she said, her voice smooth, soft, devastating. "Your empire is calling." Ethan's phone buzzed with a text from Celine that made his face pale, because even his mistress was about to turn on him. 4. The night hung heavy over the city like a velvet curtain, the lights of the luxury penthouse flickering through the floor-to-ceiling windows where Celine stood in front of the mirror, admiring the diamond necklace resting on her collarbone. She tilted her head, running her manicured fingers over the cold gemstones, a slow smile curling on her painted lips. To her, this necklace wasn't just jewelry, it was a crown, proof that she had won a game most women lost. She believed she had taken everything from Raina, Ethan's money, his attention, his bed, and soon, his future. She didn't know that beneath that polished surface, the cracks were already spreading like invisible fractures in glass, waiting to shatter. She turned to Ethan, who was lounging on the leather couch, a half-drunk glass of whiskey in his hand, grinning like a man convinced the world belonged to him. "You should have seen her face when she realized I moved the money," Ethan bragged, laughing without realizing how much the walls around him were closing in. Celine laughed with him, but inside, unease clawed at her. Raina wasn't the type to go down quietly, and Celine knew that. Earlier that day, Celine had overheard whispers of Raina walking into Ethan's company with papers in hand, whispers of the boardroom going silent when they realized she wasn't just the wife Ethan had betrayed, she was the owner who held the real power. That image haunted Celine's mind like a bad omen. She had worked too hard, played too many games to end up empty-handed now. She leaned against the counter, swirling the wine in her glass, her mind spinning with calculation. She had always seen Ethan as a stepping stone, not a destination. He was charming, yes, and wealthy, but he was also arrogant and careless. And now that Raina was back in the picture, the castle Celine had built on Ethan's stolen money was trembling. She smirked to herself as a dangerous idea began to form in the back of her mind. If Ethan could betray his wife, what made him think she wouldn't betray him too? Meanwhile, across the city, Raina sat in Lucas's office, her posture sharp and composed, dressed in black like a woman ready for war. The room was filled with files, financial statements, account records, property deeds, all trails leading back to Ethan. Lucas handed her another folder. "With these documents, we can freeze everything he owns within 48 hours, he said, his voice calm but firm. Raina's eyes didn't flicker with emotion. She was beyond pain now. She was focused. "Do it," she whispered, her tone laced with a quiet fire that even Lucas felt burn through the room. She signed each paper with the precision of someone carving her name into destiny. She remembered Ethan's mocking laugh the night he emptied her savings, remembered the way he'd looked at her like she was nothing more than a weak woman. That memory was the match that kept fueling her fire. Back at the penthouse, Celine leaned closer to Ethan, her perfume filling the room like a trap. "Ethan, listen to me," she purred, though her tone held a sharp edge underneath. "Raina isn't going to just walk away. She's going to ruin you. You need to move everything to my accounts. Now." Before it's too late, Ethan frowned, his fingers tightening around his glass. "Why would I do that?" "It's already safe," he said, arrogance dripping from his voice. Celine rolled her eyes, her irritation slipping through the cracks of her polished facade. "You're underestimating her. And underestimating a woman who's been betrayed is the stupidest mistake a man can make." Her words cut through the air like a blade. Ethan's jaw tightened. A part of him wanted to ignore her, but another part, the part that knew Raina better than anyone, felt a flicker of unease. She wasn't the type to just disappear. Raina's legal motions were already moving faster than Ethan could imagine. Lucas filed injunctions to freeze Ethan's personal and business accounts. Emails began to pour into the company's legal department, creating quiet chaos beneath Ethan's unaware smile. Raina walked out of the office that night, heels clicking like the rhythm of war drums, knowing every step she took was leading Ethan closer to his downfall. She didn't need to scream or cry anymore. Power didn't need to raise its voice. It spoke through action. The next night, Ethan and Celine sat at a candle-lit table in an exclusive restaurant, the kind where crystal chandeliers cast soft golden light on faces and wine cost more than a month's salary. Ethan leaned back, arrogant and smug, enjoying the illusion of control. "See?" he said, brushing Celine's hand. "She can't touch me." "I've made sure of that." Celine forced a smile, though inside she was calculating every angle of his downfall. She didn't love him. She loved the power his name brought her. The waiter placed the bill on the table, and Ethan handed over his black card without a second thought. But when the waiter returned with an awkward look, Ethan's smile faltered. "Sir," the waiter said carefully, "your card has been declined." For the first time, a shadow crossed Ethan's face. "Run it again," he snapped. But the waiter did, and the same result returned. Declined. Ethan's fingers tightened around the table edge, a thin line forming between his brows. Celine watched him closely, her painted lips curving slightly. She could smell fear, and Ethan was beginning to sweat. He pulled out his phone to check his banking app, but the numbers didn't make sense. 0. Frozen. Nothing. He shoved the phone back into his pocket, masking panic with a forced grin. "It's just a glitch," he lied to himself more than to Celine. Celine sipped her wine slowly, watching the first threads of his empire unravel. She had warned him. And while Ethan fumbled to keep his pride intact, Celine began planning her next move, not with him but against him. She leaned closer, feigning concern. "Ethan," she whispered, "this is what I was trying to tell you. Raina is dangerous. We need to be smarter in her mind. The wheels were already spinning. If Ethan fell, she wouldn't go down with him. She'd survive. She always did." Raina, miles away, watched the scene through quiet satisfaction. She had anticipated this moment, knowing exactly how Ethan's arrogance would blind him. She stood in front of her window, the city lights stretching out like a battlefield beneath her. Her lips curved into a quiet, dangerous smile. "Checkmate is near," she whispered to herself. The war wasn't over. It was only tightening around Ethan's throat. But Celine wasn't just another mistress. She was a predator too. While Ethan struggled to regain control, Celine began making calls to Ethan's business rivals, to lawyers, to anyone who could give her leverage. She wasn't going to sink with a sinking ship. She planned to jump to the next before the water even touched her feet. In the end, she would betray Ethan the same way he had betrayed Raina. She'd make sure of it. And as she placed her final call, a cold smile spread across her lips. "Sorry, baby," she whispered to herself, "but every king falls when the queen plays her game right." Ethan had no idea. The betrayal he started was about to circle back sharper than any blade he'd ever felt. The morning arrived like a storm disguised in sunlight. The city outside buzzed with its usual rhythm, horns blaring, heels clicking, deals being made. But for Ethan, the air felt different, heavier, like a noose tightening around his neck. He sat alone at the edge of his bed in the penthouse, his tie hanging loose around his neck, staring at the notification on his phone. Court summons. His once untouchable world now sat in the palm of Raina's hand, and for the first time, the mirror didn't reflect a man in control. It reflected a man cornered. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to steady the tremor in his chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. Raina was supposed to break, to beg, but she didn't. She fought back, and worse, she was winning. Across town, Raina stood in front of the courthouse, the early morning wind brushing against her hair like a quiet anthem of power. She wore a tailored black suit, her chin held high, a woman who no longer carried the weight of betrayal on her shoulders, but the armor of strategy and purpose. Beside her stood Lucas, calm and steady, his presence like a shield she never knew she needed until now. He was tall, with a composed strength that didn't need to roar to be felt. The way he looked at her wasn't with pity, but with respect, admiration, and something softer, a love that had been buried beneath years of friendship. He adjusted his cufflinks and leaned closer. "This isn't just about taking him down," Lucas murmured, his voice low but firm. "This is about taking your life back." For a moment, Raina's guard faltered, not because she doubted herself, but because of the warmth in Lucas's eyes. His love had always been quiet, never demanding, but today it felt like a storm she didn't know how to face. She had been betrayed, broken, humiliated. Trust had become a foreign language. And yet, here he was, a man who never left, a man who never took, a man who never lied. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself. She wasn't here to fall in love, not yet. She was here to win. But part of her couldn't ignore the safety in his presence. Inside the courthouse, whispers filled the air like ripples on a still pond. Everyone knew this case was going to be explosive. Raina's quiet return to power had already made headlines. Ethan had been painted as the golden husband, the successful businessman. But the truth was about to walk in, wearing heels and a suit, carrying legal documents like swords. Ethan arrived with his lawyer, his expensive suit doing little to hide the tension etched across his face. His jaw clenched when he saw her standing there, radiant, untouchable, and not alone. His eyes narrowed on Lucas, tall, calm, confident, standing close to her like a fortress. "Who the hell is that?" Ethan muttered to his lawyer, though the answer didn't matter. He already hated him. Raina turned just in time to meet Ethan's glare. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She gave him the kind of smile that wasn't warm or kind. It was sharp, like the edge of a blade pressed against the skin. It said, "I'm not your victim anymore." Ethan took a step forward, but Lucas subtly shifted, placing himself between them without saying a word. The protective gesture wasn't loud or dramatic, but it sent Ethan a message. She's not alone. Not anymore. The hearing room smelled of polished wood and tension. The judge hadn't even arrived, but the atmosphere was already electric. Ethan's lawyer whispered strategies into his ear, but Ethan wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on Rayna and Lucas, and the sight of Lucas's hand brushing lightly against Rayna's, steadying her, made his stomach twist. He had never felt threatened by anyone before, not in business, not in love. But now, for the first time, fear coiled in his chest like a living thing. Lucas leaned closer to Rayna, his voice low enough only for her to hear. "Are you ready for this?" She nodded, though inside her heart pounded like a war drum. This was more than a court case. This was her reclaiming the life he thought he'd stolen forever. "Then let him see what happens when the woman he betrayed stands on her own 2 feet," Lucas said softly. She smiled, not because she was unafraid, but because she was finally done being afraid. Ethan's arrogance cracked the moment he saw Lucas hand Rayna a stack of neatly organized files, legal proof that could strip everything from him. He recognized the name on the legal firm's header, Lucas Grant, a man with deep connections, an untouchable reputation, and the kind of wealth Ethan could never control. Ethan's stomach dropped as realization set in. This wasn't just Rayna fighting back. She had someone powerful at her side, someone with resources, someone who loved her enough to burn him down without blinking. Rayna turned toward Ethan as the bailiff called the court to order. The room fell silent, and the sound of the judge's gavel echoed like a gunshot. Ethan expected her to look nervous, to fidget like she used to when he controlled everything. But she stood tall. She looked at him with calm fire, a queen walking into her battlefield. And then, as Ethan's eyes locked on hers, Lucas reached out and took her hand. The gesture was simple, but it was enough to set Ethan's entire world spinning off balance. "Who is he?" Ethan hissed across the table when the judge turned away for a moment. Rayna's lips curved into the smallest, most dangerous smile he had ever seen. "Someone who never betrayed me," she replied softly, but her voice carried through the silence like a thunderclap. It wasn't just an answer. It was a declaration. Ethan's jaw clenched as rage flashed in his eyes, but beneath that fury was something else, fear. For the first time, he was losing control of the game. Ethan had always thought Rayna would be easy to crush, that her heart made her weak. But as he watched her now, dressed like power itself, with a man beside her who clearly wasn't afraid of him, he finally saw her for what she had become, untouchable. Lucas didn't just bring her legal strength, he brought protection, he brought loyalty, he brought everything Ethan had thrown away the moment he betrayed her. The judge began reading through the initial motions, her gavel tapping lightly. Ethan tried to keep his composure, but his hands trembled slightly against the table. He could feel eyes on him from every corner of the room, the board members who used to respect him, the investors who whispered behind his back, the woman he thought he could destroy. This was no longer his court. It was hers. As Lucas handed the judge a file thick with evidence, bank transfers, forged signatures, hidden accounts, Ethan's lawyer's face went pale. They weren't just playing checkers. Lucas and Rayna were playing chess, and Ethan was already 5 moves behind. The whispering in the courtroom grew louder as the judge scanned the first page, her brow arching. Rayna didn't need to say a word. Her silence was louder than any accusation Ethan could ever defend against. Ethan's chest tightened as his gaze flicked between Rayna and Lucas. That man wasn't just a lawyer, he was something more. The way Rayna stood next to him, not like a client but like an equal, cut deeper than any legal threat. Ethan had always been the one in power, the one who dictated the terms. Now he was just a man watching his empire tilt out of his grasp. And just when he thought it couldn't get worse, the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom creaked open, slicing through the tension like a blade. Heads turned. He didn't have to look to know who it was. He felt the chill run down his spine before he even saw her. Celine. She walked in wearing a blood-red dress, her heels clicking against the marble floor, her lips painted with the kind of smile that never meant good news. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She sauntered in with the slow, deliberate grace of a woman who knew the power of an entrance. But this wasn't the Celine who used to laugh on his arm over champagne. This was a woman with her own agenda. She didn't look at Ethan like a lover. She looked at him like prey. Ethan's heart began to pound, his mind racing through every secret, every lie, every dirty thing they'd done together. Raina turned her head slightly, watching Selina's entrance with cool amusement. She didn't fear Celine. If anything, she'd been waiting for this moment. Ethan's mistress, walking in at the exact moment his control slipped. It was poetic justice. Ethan's lawyer shifted nervously. "Who is she?" the lawyer whispered. But Ethan already knew. Celine wasn't here to save him. She was here to finish him. And as Celine walked up the aisle with that deadly calm smile, clutching an envelope that could end everything, Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He didn't know what she was about to reveal. He only knew one thing. Whatever secret she carried had the power to destroy him completely. 6. The courtroom fell into a thick, heavy silence as the sound of Celine's heels echoed against the polished floor. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears, each step she took dragging him closer to a truth he could no longer control. She approached with the grace of a predator, lips curved into a slow smile that wasn't meant for him. It was meant to cut him. She stopped just beside the front row, holding that thin white envelope as if it were a blade made of paper, and in a way, it was. Ethan's knuckles tightened around the edge of the table. Whatever she was about to do, he knew it wouldn't be to save him. It would be to finish him. The judge adjusted her glasses, frowning slightly at the unplanned entrance. "State your business," she said crisply. Celine lifted her chin, the soft glow of the overhead lights catching on the edge of her red lipstick. "I have evidence," she said coolly, handing the envelope to the bailiff. "Evidence that proves where Ethan Marshall's stolen funds went. And who helped him." A wave of murmurs surged through the courtroom like an incoming tide. Ethan's stomach turned to ice. This wasn't part of his plan. This wasn't supposed to happen. As the judge opened the envelope, the room seemed to hold its breath. Inside were neatly printed bank statements, email screenshots, recorded wire transfers, everything Ethan thought he'd hidden in offshore accounts under Celine's name. She had copied it all. Raina's lips twitched at the corner. She had expected Ethan to crumble eventually, but watching Celine betray him this swiftly, this cleanly, was almost poetic. Ethan's face drained of color as his lawyer frantically flipped through the copies, whispering, These are real." Ethan turned toward Celine, his voice low and rough. "What are you doing?" She met his gaze with the kind of cold amusement that used to be reserved for everyone but him. "Surviving," she said simply before turning away. She didn't love him. She never did. She loved what he could give her. And now that he had nothing to give, she was handing him over to the wolves to save herself. Ethan realized it too late. The woman he betrayed his wife for was the one who would bury him alive. The judge looked unimpressed but focused. "This evidence will be entered into the record," she said. Ethan's lawyer sputtered, trying to object, but the sound of the gavel cut him off. Raina's fingers curled slightly against the edge of the table, not from nerves, but from the quiet satisfaction of watching justice tighten around Ethan like an unbreakable chain. Lucas leaned closer and whispered, "He's running out of moves." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. What followed wasn't just a court hearing, it was a dismantling. Every lie Ethan built his empire on was peeled away in front of everyone who once bowed to him. Investors sat in the gallery, their expressions shifting from discomfort to fury as the evidence unfolded. His company wasn't just bleeding, it was collapsing. Lucas stood tall beside Raina, reading out each legal detail with precision. Every hidden transaction, every offshore account, every falsified signature, all of it laid bare. The media caught wind before the session even ended. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed like lightning. Headlines began to spread like wildfire. Business mogul accused of fraud. Ethan Marshall's empire built on lies. Wife turns the tables on husband in explosive courtroom showdown. Ethan could feel the weight of every flashbulb like a spotlight burning into his skin. His image, the king he had built in front of the world, was cracking, and there was no tape strong enough to fix it. By the end of the day, 2 of his biggest investors pulled out. The board called an emergency meeting, and Celine, the woman he thought would stand beside him, slipped into the back seat of a sleek black car and disappeared without a backward glance. Ethan stood outside the courthouse alone, his tie loose, sweat beading at his hairline, his phone buzzing with calls he didn't want to answer. One by one, the pillars that held up his kingdom were falling. Meanwhile, in her office, Raina sat behind the very desk Ethan once thought she'd never touch. She ran her fingertips across the polished surface slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of everything sink in. This was the same office where he once made decisions that crushed her. Now it was hers. She didn't raise her voice or laugh like a victor. She didn't need to. Power wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was in the way she could breathe without fear now. Lucas stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. "It's over," he said, his voice steady. "The accounts are frozen. The board sided with you. And Ethan, well, he's cornered." She nodded slowly. She could still hear his voice in the past, telling her she was weak, telling her she couldn't live without him. Those words used to shatter her. Now they made her stronger. "He thought he was the king," she murmured, more to herself than to Lucas. "But even kings fall." Ethan didn't take the fall quietly. That night, he stormed into her office like a man who had nothing left to lose. The guards tried to stop him, but she lifted her hand calmly. She wanted to see this. He burst through the door, his hair disheveled, his suit wrinkled, the scent of expensive cologne mixed with the bitterness of desperation. The once unshakable king was reduced to a man whose empire had turned to sand in his hands. Raina didn't rise from her chair. She sat there, composed, legs crossed, back straight, every inch of her screaming control. "Get out," Lucas said coldly from beside her. But Ethan raised his hands as if surrendering. "Please, please just let me talk to her," he muttered, his voice hoarse, a shadow of the man who once barked orders. Lucas hesitated, then stepped back, but his eyes never left Ethan. Ethan stumbled forward, dropping to his knees right in front of her desk. For a heartbeat, Raina almost didn't recognize him. This wasn't the same man who had looked her in the eye and transferred her life savings to his mistress. This wasn't the man who laughed when she said he'd regret it. This was someone hollow, someone broken. His voice cracked when he whispered, "Please, Raina, I made a mistake. I need you." The words hung in the air like a bad joke. She stared down at him with eyes that had once held love for him, then pain, and now nothing. Not hatred, not warmth, just a cold, glacial stillness. He had begged her once. No, she had begged him once. She had begged for love, for loyalty, for the man she thought he was. And he had walked away. Now the roles were reversed. "You need me," she repeated softly, each word dipped in steel. Ethan looked up, searching her face for a hint of softness. There was none. Her lips curled into a faint smile that wasn't cruel. It was final. "When I needed you, Ethan, you chose someone else. When I cried for you, you were in someone else's bed. When I fought for us, you fought against me. And now you need me?" She shook her head slowly. "No." Ethan reached for the edge of her desk, as if trying to hold on to something that was already gone. His empire, his pride, his illusion of control. "I can fix this," he whispered. I'll make it right. I'll give everything back." Raina leaned forward slightly, her gaze locking onto his. "You already lost everything," she said calmly. "And what's worse, you lost me long before that." Outside the office, reporters had gathered like vultures sensing blood. News of Ethan's collapse had already begun spreading in real time. Every word he said now, every desperate gesture, every broken plea would be painted in the colors of public humiliation. Lucas stood by the door, arms folded, watching a man who once called himself untouchable crumble like ash. Ethan bowed his head, his shoulders shaking with a silent, raw despair that he could no longer hide. "Raina, please," he whispered again, voice breaking. "I love you." The words might have been real, or maybe they were just another survival tactic. Either way, they arrived too late. Raina rose slowly from her chair, the click of her heels against the floor sounding like a final verdict. She walked around the desk and stood over him. "Love?" she said quietly. "You don't get to say that now. Love is what you kill when you betray it." She bent slightly, meeting his tear-filled eyes. "And you buried ours the day you transferred my future to your mistress's account." She straightened, and in that moment Ethan realized the truth. He wasn't kneeling in front of the woman he once owned. He was kneeling in front of the woman who now owned everything. She turned to Lucas, her expression cool and unwavering. "Escort him out." Lucas didn't hesitate. Ethan tried to grab her wrist, but Lucas's hand caught his first, firm and immovable. "Don't touch her," Lucas warned, voice calm but dangerous. Ethan's last shred of dignity slipped through his fingers as the guards entered and lifted him off the floor like a broken doll. As they dragged him out, Ethan's gaze lingered on her one last time, begging silently for mercy that would never come. The cameras outside caught every second of it. The disgraced king being escorted out of what used to be his castle, now belonging entirely to the woman he thought he could crush. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes went off. Ethan shielded his face with his hands. Raina stood at the window, watching him disappear into the crowd. There was no satisfaction in her expression, only a calm power. She hadn't just taken revenge, she had rewritten the story. The man who once made her beg was now on his knees, and the world had watched it happen. But as Raina turned back toward Lucas, the phone on her desk began to ring, a private line. And the message waiting on the other end wasn't about Ethan's defeat. It was something far bigger, something that would change all of their lives forever. The sound of Ethan's pleas still echoed faintly in the back of Raina's mind, not because she pitied him, but because they reminded her how far she had come from the woman who once believed love was about sacrifice. That night, after walking out of her office where Ethan knelt on the floor like a broken king stripped of his throne, she stood before the mirror in her penthouse. The city lights shimmered behind her like a field of fireflies, but it was the reflection staring back that caught her breath. Gone was the fragile woman with tear-streaked cheeks. The woman in the mirror wore power like silk. Her black dress clung to her curves, her jaw was sharp, and her eyes burned with quiet determination. She touched her chest, not in weakness, but to remind herself that her heart still beat, stronger than before. Somewhere deep inside, a small whisper of her old self asked, "Will this power ever be enough to heal?" Lucas entered the room quietly, his presence warm and unthreatening. Unlike Ethan, he never announced himself with arrogance or control. He simply stood by the doorway, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water, his tailored suit perfectly pressed, yet softened by the gentle curve of his smile. "You look like a queen," he murmured. Raina's lips curved slightly, not out of vanity, but because for once someone saw her strength instead of her pain. She turned to face him fully, the weight of the night still clinging to her shoulders. But with him there, It felt lighter. "Queens don't cry," she whispered, half to herself, half to him. He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Queens don't need to. But they can, if they trust someone enough to catch their tears." Her breath hitched, not from weakness, but because she realized, for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. The following week, while the world watched Ethan's empire collapse like a sandcastle in the tide, Raina and Lucas quietly built something new. They worked late in her office, drafting new company structures, redirecting investments, and creating a vision that wasn't just about vengeance. It was about legacy. Lucas often glanced at her while she worked, watching the way her brows furrowed in concentration, how she chewed on her pen when she was deep in thought, how her power radiated from quiet confidence rather than noise. He didn't interrupt. He simply made sure there was coffee when she needed it, warmth when the nights grew too long, and silence when her strength needed room to breathe. In those quiet glances, something unspoken began to burn between them. One night, while rain tapped against the glass walls like a gentle drum, Raina found herself staring out at the city she once felt too small to conquer. Lucas approached slowly, placing a soft wool coat over her shoulders. "You've been standing here for an hour," he said gently. She didn't look at him. "I spent years giving my heart to someone who only knew how to break things. And now, I don't know what to do with a heart that finally belongs to me." His voice was soft but firm. "Then keep it. Guard it. And when you're ready, trust someone who will hold it like the crown it is." For a fleeting second, Raina felt something dangerous and beautiful. Hope. The charity gala came like a storm of lights and whispers. It wasn't just another event. It was her statement to the world that Raina Blackwell was no longer Ethan's shadow. The ballroom was draped in gold and ivory, chandeliers dripping light like diamonds, guests dressed in their most extravagant attire. Cameras flashed as she entered, arm linked with Lucas's. Every step she took on the marble floor was a declaration. She had returned, not as the betrayed wife, but as the woman who owned her throne. Reporters shouted questions, investors whispered her name with respect, and even the people who once pitied her now lowered their gaze in awe. In the corner of the room, a pair of eyes watched her with venomous envy. Lucas's hand brushed against hers, a small, grounding gesture that reminded her she wasn't walking this path alone. He leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "This is your night," he said softly. "Not mine. Not his. Yours." Her lips parted in a soft, genuine smile, the kind she hadn't felt in years. "It doesn't feel like revenge anymore," she admitted quietly. "It feels like freedom." He looked at her like she hung the stars in the sky. "That's because it is." The music swelled, and for a moment the world blurred. She allowed herself to dance, not for display, not to prove a point, but because she could. Lucas took her hand, and the two moved in sync, not needing words. She felt the safety of his arms, the warmth of his steady presence, the quiet way he made everything else disappear. No lies, no betrayal, just two souls standing where pain once lived, rewriting their story without a script. Just beyond the marble archway, a figure watched, hands clenched around a small black envelope. Later that night, as the gala quieted and the guests turned their attention to speeches, Raina stood on the stage beneath a sea of lights. She spoke not about pain, but about rebuilding, about women who rose from ashes, about power that was earned, not stolen. The applause thundered through the room, but it was Lucas's quiet, proud smile that anchored her. It wasn't love born out of saving. It was love rooted in respect. Somewhere outside, in the shadows, Ethan's car pulled up to the curb. When the night ended and the last of the guests left, Raina walked out to the balcony, the cool night air brushing against her skin like a whisper of everything she'd survived. Lucas joined her, hands in his pockets, eyes soft. "You've built an empire out of your pain," he said. Not everyone can do that. She tilted her head toward him. I didn't build it alone. He smiled. You could have. But I'm glad you didn't. Their eyes locked, and for a heartbeat the world stood still. Behind them, the sound of a door creaking interrupted the fragile magic between them. Raina turned slowly, and there he was. Ethan. The man who once believed she'd never stand without him. His suit was wrinkled, his hair a mess, his once proud shoulders slumped beneath the weight of everything he'd lost. But in his hand was something small, black and ominous. A thin smile crept across his lips, not of love, not of regret, but of someone who believed he still had one last card to play. The light from the chandelier cast a shadow across his face, half angel, half monster. Lucas stepped in front of Raina instinctively, but Ethan only raised the envelope higher. Did you really think it was over? He rasped. You may have my company, Raina, but I still have something you don't. The envelope in Ethan's hand wasn't just paper. It was the beginning of a storm none of them saw coming. 8. The night air turned colder when Ethan stepped forward, his shoes splashing against the marble tiles as rain from his soaked clothes dripped onto the floor, forming a dark, uneven trail behind him, like the residue of a man who had already lost everything but still refused to admit it. The black envelope in his hand looked harmless at first, but the way he gripped it, tight, desperate, as if it was the last rope keeping him from sinking, made Raina's heartbeat slow and steady, like a lioness watching a cornered animal. She didn't flinch. She didn't move back. She had already looked into the eyes of betrayal before, and survived. Lucas shifted slightly closer, his body between her and the man who had once held the power to destroy her. But tonight, Ethan wasn't holding power anymore, just ghosts. Ethan's eyes, once full of arrogance, now shimmered with something else, an unsettling mixture of guilt, rage, and a twisted hope. You think you've won, Raina, he said hoarsely, his voice breaking under the weight of sleepless nights and cheap whiskey. But this is the last card you didn't see coming. His fingers tapped the edge of the envelope, as if daring her to ask. Raina tilted her chin upward, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing fear. I've seen all your cards, Ethan, she said evenly, and I burned the deck. Ethan's smirk returned, faint but sharp, like the blade of a dying knife still capable of cutting. He tossed the envelope onto the balcony table between them, the paper landing with a soft, almost elegant sound that didn't match the tension twisting through the air. The wind caught the corner of it, flipping it open just slightly, and Raina saw a flash of something inside, photographs, legal documents, maybe something darker. Ethan watched her eyes narrow, and it made him chuckle bitterly. You've taken everything from me, he rasped, stepping closer, his soaked suit clinging to his frame like a shroud. But I still know how to make your world shake. Lucas's jaw tightened, but Raina raised a hand subtly to keep him from reacting. She wanted Ethan to finish whatever performance he thought he had. The storm outside seemed to mirror the storm building inside that balcony. Ethan's voice grew lower, almost conspiratorial. You think the world sees you as the queen now, but queens have secrets too, and I made sure to keep one, just in case. Raina stepped forward, not backing away from him, but closing the distance on purpose, her heels clicking like gunshots on the floor. You taught me never to trust a man with secrets, she whispered coldly. That's why I stopped loving you the day you chose someone else's bank account over our life. His mouth opened, but no defense came. Just the sound of rain hitting the balcony rail like bullets. For the first time, he looked like a man who realized his own power had expired. She slowly opened the envelope, her fingers steady, controlled. Inside were a series of photographs, grainy, black and white, but unmistakably tied to something she didn't yet understand. She flipped through them carefully. There were signatures, locations, property titles. Ethan watched her closely, desperate to catch even the smallest flicker of fear. "Everything you built," he said, leaning in, "is sitting on a crack you never saw. And I've been waiting for the perfect moment to let it break." Raina met his gaze head-on, unblinking. "You waited too long." A flash of lightning illuminated Ethan's face, and for a split second she saw the man who once kissed her forehead every night. But that man was gone. The following days turned into a quiet storm of legal strategy and silent warfare. Ethan tried everything, calls, threats, even late-night visits, but none of it worked. Raina no longer reacted like the woman he once manipulated. Instead of pleading or flinching, she moved with precision. She gathered her team, called Lucas, involved her most trusted legal experts, and traced every line of those documents Ethan had tried to use as a weapon. What he thought was a sword turned out to be a paper shield, because years ago she had already taken measures to protect her name from the very kind of man he had become. Ethan didn't realize it yet, but the game he was playing was already over. Rain became a familiar rhythm in those days, almost as if the universe itself was trying to wash away the last remnants of their story. Ethan stood outside her office building more than once, in the pouring rain, his suit clinging to his shivering body, his hair plastered against his forehead, eyes hollow like someone watching the castle he built crumble stone by stone. Inside, Raina moved like a queen who no longer looked back. She finalized her ownership transfers, turned every business tied to his name into hers, and with Lucas by her side, rebuilt everything Ethan had taken for granted. Her voice was calm in every board meeting, her presence commanded every room. But Ethan, broken and soaked in the rain, refused to vanish quietly. One evening, as she stepped out of her glass office into the echoing hallway, she found him standing there again, like a ghost that didn't understand it, no longer belonged to the living. His eyes were red, his hands shaking. "Raina," he whispered, and the way he said her name was almost foreign now, like a stranger trying to speak a language he'd forgotten. "Please, just listen." But Raina wasn't the same woman who once froze when he raised his voice. She walked past him, her heels echoing against the marble floor, and said quietly, "You broke me once, Ethan." But now, she turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes with the power of someone untouchable. "I'm unbreakable." His breath hitched, because this was the moment he realized he had truly lost her. Ethan followed her out into the rain, desperation clinging to him like the storm itself. "You can't just erase me," he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his own downfall. She stopped at the bottom of the steps, umbrella opening above her like a crown. "I didn't erase you," she replied softly. "You erased yourself." Her driver held the car door open, but she didn't get in yet. She wanted him to hear it all. "This company, this life, all of it was built with my hands, my name, my faith. And you were just the man who thought I couldn't survive without you." Thunder rumbled in the sky, like applause to her words. He fell to his knees in the rain, just like he had in her office, but this time there was no audience, no business, no empire, just a man who realized the queen no longer belonged to him. Tears mixed with the rain as he reached out, but she didn't move toward him. She didn't need to. Her strength was no longer tied to proving anything to him. She turned, stepped into the car, and signed the last document with a steady hand as the vehicle door shut behind her. That signature, neat, sharp, final, erased Ethan Blackwell from every piece of the empire he once believed was his birthright. But just before she could close that chapter completely, his voice cut through the storm like a blade. "Raina," he whispered, his voice trembling, "you don't know everything." The door was halfway shut, but those words froze her hand for just a heartbeat. She turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes through the rain-speckled glass. "I know enough," she replied. But he shook his head slowly, a strange, bitter smile curving his lips. No, you don't. And when you find out, it won't just be my world that falls apart. Something in his tone was different this time. Not arrogant, not manipulative, just dangerous. Rayna exhaled slowly, forcing the chill from her spine to fade. She wasn't the woman who once trembled at his words. But still, something in that whisper felt like a fuse had been lit in the dark. Lucas's voice came from beside her, firm and grounding. He's trying to shake you. Don't let him. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on Ethan for one last moment before the car drove away, leaving him kneeling in the downpour. The night swallowed his figure in darkness, but his last words echoed in her mind long after the city lights blurred past the window. Ethan's final move hadn't been played yet, and deep down, Rayna knew the game wasn't entirely over. 9. Rayna didn't look back when Ethan's broken whisper sliced through the silence of that rain-soaked night. She walked forward like a storm cloaked in elegance, the sound of her heels echoing against the marble hallway like the steady beat of triumph. That night marked the true end of their story, not with a scream, not with a plea, but with a woman who had finally learned to rise without needing anyone to pull her up. In the years that followed, the world changed around her. Empires rose and fell, fortunes came and went. But Rayna's empire didn't just survive. It flourished like wildfire in a world that had once tried to burn her down. The city skyline had become her throne, and every glittering light beneath her penthouse balcony felt like a victory she'd carved out with her own bare hands. Her name had become power, her company a symbol of strength, and her story one whispered in awe through boardrooms and whispered in envy by those who once doubted her. Lucas stood behind her, silent yet unwavering, his presence warm and steady against the chill of the evening breeze. When he slipped his arm around her waist, the warmth of his hand didn't claim her. It simply held her as an equal, a partner, a man who had loved her through scars and storms without ever trying to chain her to the past. Rayna leaned back slightly, her head resting against his shoulder, and for a brief moment, the woman who had been forged in fire allowed herself to breathe in peace. Down below, the city glimmered like a sea of stars, each light a reminder of how far she'd come, from the girl whose trust had been shattered to the woman whose name now commanded rooms. Lucas kissed her temple softly, and his voice, deep and quiet, wrapped around her like silk. "You did it," he murmured. "You didn't just win. You changed everything." Rayna's lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. Winning was never the goal. Surviving with her soul intact was. But the victory. That was the poetry written by the ashes of everything Ethan had once tried to take from her. She remembered his voice that night, hoarse and desperate, whispering her name as the rain soaked through his expensive suit. But no amount of begging could resurrect what he had already buried with betrayal. "He thought he broke me," she whispered, almost to herself, fingers resting against the cool balcony rail. "But he only taught me how to rebuild stronger." Lucas tightened his hold just a little, pride gleaming in his eyes as he looked at her not as a fragile woman, but as a queen standing atop a kingdom she built herself. Far away in a dimly lit apartment, Ethan sat alone on a sagging couch, the rain still falling outside, as though mocking the man who once believed the world revolved around his power. The empire that had once made him untouchable was gone. The people who had once bowed to him had turned their faces elsewhere. And the woman he had underestimated was now untouchable, far beyond his reach. He watched the news, her face glowing across the screens, her smile radiant, her company announcing another major acquisition. It burned, not because she had everything, but because she had everything without him. Rayna had built her empire not on revenge alone, but on brilliance, resilience, and strategy. Her business empire stretched across continents now, her name etched in gold where his had faded into dust. Ethan clutched an empty glass, knuckles white, whispering her name like a prayer that would never be answered. He'd tried to ruin her, but she'd become something no man could control. Power wrapped in grace. Back in the penthouse, Lucas opened a folder on the table behind them. Inside was a file marked Final Act. Raina's fingers brushed the cover slowly, her eyes gleaming with a mix of satisfaction and calm control. She didn't need to destroy Ethan. The world had already watched him crumble under the weight of his own greed. But she did have one final surprise, one thread carefully pulled over years, waiting for the perfect moment to tighten. "Are you sure?" Lucas asked, though his tone already knew her answer. Raina turned to face him, her black dress flowing like liquid midnight, her eyes sharper than they had ever been. "He thought the storm was over," she said softly. "But this is the part where I show him. I was the storm all along." She signed the document with a single fluid motion, the ink sealing what would be remembered as the cleanest, most devastating power play in their city's history. It wasn't born of rage. It was born of strategy, patience, and an unshakable will. That signature activated a silent takeover of the last remaining asset Ethan clung to, a small subsidiary he believed hidden. It was the last piece of his pride. By sunrise, it would legally belong to Raina, the final nail in the coffin of a man who once thought her weak. The wind on the balcony grew cooler, brushing her face as if the night itself bowed to her reign. Lucas stood beside her, their fingers intertwined now, not in a grip of desperation, but in a union of equals. She looked at him, the man who never tried to fix her, only walked beside her while she rebuilt herself. His eyes carried no greed, no jealousy, just unwavering love. It was the kind of love she once thought didn't exist after betrayal. Years of pain had melted into this moment of clarity. "You know," she whispered, "I don't hate him anymore." Lucas nodded slowly. "That's because you've already won." And she had. Ethan could no longer touch her, not her mind, not her heart, not her future. But life has a way of twisting ironies into art, and just as she whispered her final goodbye to the past, her assistant entered quietly with an envelope. "Ma'am," she said, her voice respectful, "he's requested to meet you tomorrow." "He says it's important." Lucas stiffened slightly, his protective instinct flickering, but Raina lifted a hand gently. "It's fine," she murmured. There was no fear in her tone, only the calm of a woman who no longer bled from old wounds. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight painted the city gold, Raina arrived at a quiet cafe. Ethan was already there, shoulders hunched, his expensive suit hanging loose on a body that no longer carried power. When she walked in, heads turned, not because she sought attention, but because power always walked loudest when it didn't need to speak. Ethan stood slowly, the weight of years in his eyes. "Raina," he began, voice hoarse. She sat across from him, elegant, composed, untouchable. The man who once made her tremble now trembled before her. "I've lost everything," he whispered, "and I know I deserve it. But I needed you to know. I never stopped thinking about you." Raina tilted her head slightly, eyes steady. "Thinking about me isn't the same as valuing me, Ethan. You didn't lose me by accident. You threw me away." The truth hit him harder than any revenge ever could. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't gloat. She simply stated the truth, and the silence that followed felt heavier than a scream. Ethan's hands shook as he slid an old ring box across the table, the one she had once worn. "I kept it," he whispered, "because I knew no one else would ever love me the way you did." Raina looked at the box but didn't touch it. "That's the thing, Ethan. Love isn't a trophy you keep after breaking it. It's something you protect before it's gone." For the first time, Ethan truly understood the cost of his betrayal. Not in numbers, not in assets, but in the quiet, steady strength of the woman who no longer needed him. She stood slowly, her chair barely making a sound, and left the box where it lay. It wasn't anger, it was closure. Hours later, the world exploded with headlines. Rayna Cole takes full control of former Ethan Enterprises. Ethan didn't even fight it. He simply watched the empire he'd built on arrogance become the crown of the woman he once broke. That night, back on her balcony, Lucas wrapped his arms around her again as fireworks from the city's annual gala burst in the distance. The world below celebrated her newest victory, but she didn't need applause. Her power was silent, her heart finally free. "You did it," Lucas whispered again. Rayna leaned into him, her smile soft yet unshakable. "No," she murmured, "I lived." Ethan, somewhere miles away, stared at the night sky with nothing left to hold. His final downfall wasn't the loss of his company or wealth. It was the realization that the woman he thought he owned had become the woman he could never touch again. Rayna whispered into the night, "Never underestimate the woman you betrayed." What Ethan didn't know was that the final document she'd signed wasn't just the end of his empire. It was the beginning of a global expansion under her name, with his former allies already standing behind her. His chapter had closed, but hers was only beginning. And that, "My family," is how a broken heart rose into power and turned betrayal into victory. If you felt every twist, every moment of revenge and strength in this story, don't just scroll away. Your support is what keeps Beyond Color Stories alive. So drop your thoughts in the comments, tell me what hit your heart the most, and of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next jaw-dropping story. Until next time, stay strong, stay unshakable, and remember, the best revenge is rising higher than they ever imagined. Black Heart Headphones.